Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I've got a short presentation that will talk about some of the work we've recently done and some of the things we see in food supply chains. But firstly, an advertisement. These are the sorts of things that we work with in our business. I'm trying to background for you where our analysis comes from, the sorts of inputs that we have driving that work, and therefore that gives you some sense of why we look at things the way we do and what the perspective is around that analysis. So Freshlogic is a food analysis business primarily. We have a number of platforms of information gathering, data analysis that thread together into a couple of important spines of our work. We have a discipline of measuring food moving through supply chains from farm to consumer, accounting for its use, being consistent with how things are treated along the supply chain, accounting for yields and all those sorts of things. So we can have a general mapping through that work of where food goes, what's driving volumes and value, what are the dynamics through those supply chains. We also have a platform which we draw on for FoodMap called Food Frontiers, which is essentially what's happening at the frontier of change in the Australian food market, what's driving some of those changes in consumer preferences, food manufacturers and food marketers' strategies, what's driving retail trends, and that platform is something that we track over time. We've pulled all those things into a publication which I'm going to give a major plug for towards the end of this, called FoodMap, which the federal government the department has just published, which draws on those insights and pulls it out into a summary document, which I encourage you all to pick up on the way out, or if you've already got it on the way in, to essentially provide an up-to-date mapping of what's going on in food chains from farm through to consumer. What are the structures of those channels and what's causing change. Firstly, the structure of the food market. Now, there's a lot of very gross generalisations usually applied to what we call the food market. We see two major components, retail and food service, essentially food bought for taking home and consuming, and food purchased for eating out of the home. There are many segments of that market, and then when you start to lay that out across the various detailed channels and put some numbers on the far right-hand side in terms of the size of the food market and the diversity of what's going on in there, the food market is a complex picture. Often, as I said, overly simplified and generalised in terms of what's occurring and what change there is. As we have worked through the process and what the document captures is a sense of not only great challenge that occurs in the concentrated and consolidated components of that food market, but also the opportunities through diversity, the way in which the food chain can respond to where the consumer is and what the consumer is requiring, and what opportunities, therefore, they may be for people to avoid the clutter or congestion of some of those consolidated channels and reach consumers in innovative ways. And there's plenty of that going on in the food market at the moment. There's a lot of tough stuff. There's also a lot of upside that's apparent. So that's our reading of shares of the marketplace through various components of retail and the diverse elements of food service. What we've seen in the last few years, there's tremendous change going on in the food market. We've seen some major recalibration of settings that have influenced how those market shares have evolved and who's making what out of the chain. We've had some deep settings of consumer behaviour which have been there for a long time. More desire for convenience, changing household structures, different aspirational wants that people have over time. Those things tend to drift on and continue to evolve into many different niches and trends. But we've seen in recent times some of those things becoming a bit stronger. Some of these are more emergent, so the caring for the planet kind of trends, the way in which people have decided they want to get on top of the kitchen and get more involved in that, and that's a response both to stimulus from external and the insecurity of household spending. So there's a mix of factors that have been sitting in the background. We've seen some strong response to that through the way the people competing for the shares of the food market have dealt with that change. So I know David is going to cover some of this in greater detail. Some of the intensity of competition, the focus of value that's occurring at retail in the grocery retail sector, The way in which brands have been used by retailers to reinforce that concept of value has driven quite a lot of change through. But we've also seen diversity occur. The ethical propositions, free range, etc., those sorts of things have grown in importance to people, and the way in which they've looked for more fresh, local product in their offering. So what we've seen as a result of that coming through the chain, certainly some escalated pressures on food suppliers. It's got tougher economically and financially. It's also become difficult to get the trade-off right between innovation and value, or chasing high unit value and meeting the requirements of efficient volumes. We've seen greater requirement of innovation. The consumers should always drive innovation, and the consumers are driving and calling for a lot of innovation in what's being produced and supplied to them. Food service, whilst it seemingly is under the pump in terms of share, food service is also evolving, going through quite a lot of change, also responding to value very strongly, and the smarter players that have responded to value have done better in the last few years. But there's a greater depth and diversity of offering that's available and being sought. And when we look at the processed food sector, obviously the economics are placing that sector under strong pressure. I'll talk about more of that in just a minute. We're certainly in the era of the frugal consumer. Those settings have changed and caused quite a deal of change back up through the chain, right through to the farm sector, and everyone's feeling that. People spending less on food. The perception is that taking food home and preparing a meal at home is a cheaper way to eat, and that has rippled across the food industry. We track this stuff over time, and we've tracked consumer spending food spending by households through a panel. And as you can see on that top chart, it's gradually drifted down over the last 3 years. That's an average weekly spend just on food, not on a grocery shop, because there's a whole lot of non-food in that spend, but this is just on food, taken home or eaten out. And you can see why the little bit of food service has been under the pump as that time has evolved. And you can see where the supermarkets are clawing for a diminishing amount of money that's passing out of households into the food market. The bottom chart shows that percentage drift. When we started tracking this, we were close to 70%. That's drifted up to nearly 77% of all take-home retail food purchases as a percentage of all food. So the share of that take-home, the share of total food spend won by the take-home food purchase, be that grocery stores, independent specialists or whatever, has gradually risen over time as people have looked to save. The food processing sector, and there's quite a bit of detail on this in the food map package. We see a number of things around food processing, but it is not all bad. There's a lot of tough stuff, and what I've done there to make it easier, visually easier for you this morning, because you probably all had a big dinner and a late night and staggered back somewhere. The green lines are the good news and the red lines are the bad news, just to help you out. I'm going to work for the market end. We've got a greater deal of demand for information being thrust in front of consumers. A lot of debate about what form that takes, how clear it should be, how important it is in decision making. When someone walks down an aisle and selects a product, do they actually look at the label? Do they look at that fine print or not? Or should we be simplifying the message? But there is a clamour for more information to tell the story, or to be quite complete with what's in that product. We're seeing greater demand for natural additive-free products. The aversion to the risk of allergy is pushing through, but there's also this natural essence of food is quite important. A good opportunity for those that can capture that and lock that into a product attribute. Much greater diversity in home cooking. That's provided people with an opportunity in the form in which products are delivered to households, the way people shop, to solve that greater desire for home cooking. And so that presents an opportunity in the way food's presented, how far it's processed, and what sorts of solution it's providing in that meal assembly exercise. Private label expansion, obviously a red line there. The significant shift in margin is one part of the story. The limitation that puts on the ability to communicate product values and attributes is another part of it. So the ability for a supplier to tell their story through that label is greatly diminished, and therefore that takes away some of the ability to respond to the particular needs of a consumer that's being targeted. The demand for convenience and waste reduction, we see this as a big trend. That convenience simply hasn't gone away because things have tightened up. People have sought a value in convenience in different ways. And the smarter ones have responded quickly to that. Waste reduction is increasing, so people are thinking that I can get a convenient product, I can waste less because I throw less away. There's a doubling in that package. So punnet of tomatoes, seen to be a good addition to a salad, very easy, tip it out, plonk it on. They're paying 25 to 30 bucks a kilo for that rather than the gourmet tomatoes. People don't even notice the price, but certainly a great way for people to capture value by supplying that particular need for a quick meal. So greater demand for minimal processing, coming back through the chain. There's greater scope for processed meal solutions. We are believers that the ready meal revolution will get here in Australia. It's been in other countries. The retailers have assembled teams of imported talent over the years, and we've seen various waves of that come through, and various philosophies come through the retail management structures, primarily different versions of UK retailers we've seen trotted out. So that meal solution will come. It is getting better. It is being responded to. We think the innovators around the big retailers, probably the people going to lead that and take the solution into that format. But still great upside in that market. Back down the chain where most of the bad news exists. Our export advantage is weakened. We've got a much greater reliance on imported ingredients. Part of the work we've done has tracked over time the structure of food imports of processed food, and we're seeing more of the complete product coming in ingredient form rather than it being processed through from Australian manufacturing. So those making more complex food products are buying in more of those components, and we're finding our primary manufacturers selling overseas and watching it rock back into their own marketplace. Industry consolidation is going to create more pressure for producers, how they access a market, how they can be involved, because that is tightening and the supply chain masters are looking to simplify. Strong competitive cost pressures on pushing back up into the farm sector, and naturally someone who's supplying both fresh and processed markets has got a great quandary as to how much investment to put in each and getting that balance right. And back on farm, strong cost pressures that are there through the volatility of the farm sector for one, but also these pressures ramping back up the supply chain. So that's a high view of the processing sector, what some of the challenges and opportunities might be. The food map package pulls together a set of opportunities and or future directions.